Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Storm. There is a silence deeper than silence. It lives beneath the noise, beneath the constant scroll of headlines, the hum of traffic, the ping of devices that keep our attention hostage. It lives beneath the shouted opinions, beneath the choreographed chaos of ambition and anxiety. Beneath all of it, there is a stillness, ancient, patient, undisturbed. A whisper in the storm. And it calls to you now. This isn't the silence of idleness. It's not the numb pause between the next dopamine hit and the last regret. No, this silence is a furnace. A sacred forge. It's where the truth hides when the world forgets how to listen. It's where your soul goes when your ego gets too loud. But how do you hear it? In an age built to drown it out. There was a time, not so long ago, when greatness came not from volume but from depth. When men and women didn't chase validation but conviction. When the light they followed didn't flicker from a screen but burned from within. Thomas Edison sat alone in the dark, not chasing fame but clarity, testing filaments through sleepless nights while the world slept on. When his lab burned to the ground, he didn't mourn. He said, "There's value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." This is the mindset of the undistracted. The clear-minded, the builders of the unshakable. You see, clarity does not shout. It whispers, "Boys." And only those brave enough to become still can hear it. But we weren't taught how to be still. We were taught to chase, to grasp, to scroll faster and think louder. We are rewarded not for knowing ourselves, but for knowing the algorithm. We have confused stimulation with inspiration, movement with progress, information with wisdom. And we wonder why we feel lost even when surrounded by maps. But the lost don't need more directions. They need to stop running. Look at the world. Look how it spins like a wheel on fire. News cycles, opinion wars, endless notifications, all designed to keep you fragmented. Every piece of your attention auctioned off to the highest bidder. Your time, your most sacred currency, bleeding out by the second. And yet, somewhere in you, there's more than this. There has to be. There's a part of you, silent, powerful, ancient, that doesn't play by the rules of the dopamine economy. That part of you remembers what matters. It's the part that stood with Lincoln when he walked alone toward his purpose, torn by a nation's anguish but lit by the fire of a just cause. The part that lit Walt Disney's imagination as he sketched dreams into life when no bank would believe in him. The part that refused to die when Mandela sat behind bars for 27 years, turning prison into a university of the spirit. That part of you is clarity. And it is still here. But to reach it, you must make a choice. A fierce, unshakable choice. To stop being a passenger in a vehicle someone else is driving. To pull yourself from the rush of the crowd. To listen again, not to the loudest voice, but the truest one. Clarity is not something you find. It is something you remember. And it begins by remembering who you were before the noise. Before you learned that silence was awkward. Before you mistook distraction for freedom. Before you traded depth for speed, wisdom for content, reality for simulation. You were not born to be entertained. You were born to be awakened. Clarity begins the moment you realize that much of what you've accepted as normal is the very thing keeping you numb. Ask yourself, when was the last time you felt the weight of your own breath? The quiet rhythm of your heart beating not for productivity, but for presence? When was the last time you sat in a room alone and didn't reach for a screen to shield you from your own thoughts? We are terrified of our own minds. But only because we have forgotten how powerful they are. The mind, when tamed, is a force of nature. But untamed, it is a cage. You were not meant to be a prisoner of overthinking. You were born to be a sculptor of thought. A creator. A listener of the soul's whisper. But it takes war to find that stillness again. A war with distraction. A war with the part of you that craves comfort more than courage. Make no mistake, this is a battlefield. And clarity is not a gift. It is a victory. One you must win daily. Because the world will not slow down for you. It will scream louder. It will market more aggressively. It will invent new ways to steal your attention and sell it back to you in pieces. But you were born to see through it. You were born to remember. You were not born in a feed. You were born in fire. The same fire that drove Da Vinci to sketch ideas that wouldn't exist for centuries. The same fire that made Carnegie work as a bobbin boy for $1.20 a week and rise to become one of the world's greatest industrialists. The same fire that built steel empires, wrote symphonies in candlelight, and whispered to the Wright brothers that flight was not madness, it was destiny. That fire lives in you. But it doesn't roar. It doesn't beg. It waits. And in the noise of modern life, it hides. But the moment you become still, truly still, you begin to see. You see how often you've reacted instead of chosen. How often you've consumed instead of created. How many times you've betrayed your own soul just to be accepted by a crowd that forgot you the next day. You see how often your clarity was stolen, not in dramatic moments, but in quiet compromises. A little lie here. A delayed dream there. A voice you didn't trust. A whisper you ignored. But now, you are beginning to wake up. Because there is a truth you can no longer run from. You cannot build a meaningful life on noise. And you cannot find yourself in places designed to make you forget who you are. So, you return. To stillness. To solitude. To silence, not as absence, but as presence. Not as emptiness, but as space. Space for the real voice to rise. And when it does, everything changes. Because clarity is not passive. It is fierce. It cuts. It demands. It doesn't offer comfort, it offers purpose. It doesn't give you what you want, it reveals what you must become. You will feel it first as unease. A discomfort, like the shedding of an old skin. The truth will sting before it liberates you. But lean into that sting. It's the wound that heals. Because from that wound, purpose will rise. And from purpose, discipline. And from discipline, action. And from action, a life no longer lived on accident. But it starts now. In this moment. In the decision to stop living at the surface and go beneath. Beneath the noise. Beneath the branding. Beneath the metrics. Beneath the fear of being misunderstood. There is no clarity without courage. And there is no courage without silence. So step into the silence. Let it strip you bare. Let it show you who you are beneath the armor of appearances. Beneath the expectations. Beneath the noise. Because only there does the real journey begin. Not the journey the world expects of you, but the one you were built for. And that journey starts with one simple act. Listening. Listening to the whisper in the storm. Chapter 2. The War for the Mind. They don't tell you that clarity has enemies. They don't tell you that the battle isn't outside. It never was, and that the fiercest war you will ever fight won't be against failure or loss or rejection, but against the constant assault on your mind, against the slow erosion of your ability to think deeply, to feel fully, and to act with undiluted purpose in a world designed to scatter your thoughts before they ever solidify into conviction. The truth is, most people don't even realize the war is happening. That's the brilliance of it. It's not a war fought with bullets or bombs. It's fought with dopamine, with convenience, with distraction wrapped in the glittering cloak of entertainment, novelty, and artificial urgency. It's fought in the algorithms that predict your next thought better than you understand your last one. It's fought in every empty scroll, every short-circuited decision, every notification that pulls you away from the work you were born to do and toward the life you were trained to settle for. And the cost of losing this war is not pain, it's mediocrity. A soft, painless death. Not the kind that breaks your body, but the kind that rusts your spirit. The kind of death that happens slowly, invisibly, every time you choose comfort over growth, distraction over presence, validation over truth. Let this settle in. The human mind, your mind, was not built to be fed constant noise. It was built to wander, to contemplate, to wrestle with questions that don't come with quick answers, to imagine worlds that do not yet exist, and to endure the sacred boredom required for genius to emerge from the silence. Every extraordinary life, every revolutionary idea, every great shift in history, was born not from speed, but from solitude. It was born in the space where the noise had been stripped away and the mind was forced to think without a crutch. Nikola Tesla once said, "The mind is sharper and keener in seclusion and uninterrupted solitude." No big laboratory is needed in which to think. And he was right. He didn't need applause, he didn't need permission, he needed silence, and in that silence, he built the future. But today, solitude is feared. It's treated like a disease. We're taught to avoid silence, to medicate boredom, to kill time, as if time was the enemy and not the very material from which your destiny is shaped. And so we fill every gap, every quiet moment, with something, anything, just to avoid the discomfort of being alone with our own thoughts. But here's the paradox. The very discomfort you run from is the path to everything you're chasing. You want confidence? Then learn to face your own mind without flinching. You want purpose? Then stop numbing the signals trying to point you there. You want clarity? Then stop believing that clarity will arrive fully formed, wrapped in certainty and free of fear. Clarity doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It grows slowly, beneath the rubble of everything you thought you needed. It rises from the ashes of every false belief, every inherited opinion, every expectation you were too scared to question. It comes not when the world is finally quiet, but when you decide to stop listening to its noise. It's tempting to believe the problem is the external world. That if you could just delete the apps, leave the city, change the job, cut off the noise, you'd finally have peace. But clarity isn't found by running. It's found by standing still long enough to look your chaos in the eye and name it for what it is. There's a reason Marcus Aurelius, an emperor surrounded by power, still wrote daily in his journal just to keep his mind centered. There's a reason Buddhist monks sit for hours in silence, not to escape the world but to master themselves. There's a reason athletes, artists, inventors, and leaders across time have sought stillness, not to relax, but to reawaken. Because stillness is not the absence of movement, it is the presence of mastery. And if you cannot be still, you cannot be free. If your mind is always pulled by the latest message, the loudest voice, the newest crisis, then you are not living, you are reacting. You are not building, you are surviving. And survival, no matter how comfortable it becomes, will never feed your soul. So you must take your mind back. You must reclaim it from the machinery designed to keep it weak. You must become ruthless about where your attention goes, because every stolen second is not just time lost, it's clarity sacrificed. You must learn to be deliberate again. To wake up and choose your thoughts before the world injects its own. To decide, with force, what matters before someone else decides for you. Because if you don't anchor your mind, it will drift, and in a world this loud, drifting means drowning. Look at the greats. Carnegie didn't build an empire by multitasking. Disney didn't create worlds by half listening to his own imagination. Lincoln didn't hold a fractured nation together by outsourcing his thinking to the crowd. They learned to go inward, deep, uncomfortably inward, and from that depth, they forged something the world could not ignore. You must do the same. That doesn't mean rejecting technology or abandoning society. It means refusing to let your mind become a slave to it. It means using tools, not being used by them. It means reclaiming the power to choose what you think, what you believe, what you focus on, not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to truly live. And yes, it will be hard. It will feel unnatural at first, because distraction has become the default, and discipline now feels like rebellion. But clarity isn't about ease. It's about integrity. It's about walking away from the hypnotic pull of shallow things and turning toward the terrifying beauty of your real potential. You were not built for surface-level living. You were not made to scroll through life hoping something meaningful will finally appear. You were built for vision, for impact, for depth. But none of that will happen if you keep giving your power away to anything that flashes, pings, or trends. This is the war for your mind. And you don't win it by waiting. You win it by choosing. Choosing stillness over noise, depth over speed, creation over consumption, integrity over image, purpose over popularity, legacy over likes. That choice will feel small at first, like waking up and leaving your phone in another room, like taking a walk without headphones, like saying no to another hour of digital escape. But those small choices compound. They build strength. They build sovereignty. They build clarity. And once you've felt that clarity, once you've seen what your mind is capable of without noise, you will never again settle for a distracted life. Because you will know what it means to be awake. and you will know what it means to be free. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Belief. There comes a moment in every life when the world you've been handed begins to fracture, not because it breaks on its own, but because something inside you becomes too awake, too aware, too unwilling to keep pretending that the beliefs you were given still fit the person you're becoming. This fracture isn't loud. It doesn't happen in a blaze of glory or a cinematic epiphany. It happens slowly, in the quiet rebellion of the mind, in the subtle ache of a truth that no longer lets itself be ignored, in the growing tension between what you're told to believe and what your soul knows is real. Because belief is not something you inherit, it's something you build. And for far too many people, the foundation was laid before they ever had a choice. Before they could question. Before they could think for themselves. Before they even knew that most of what they call truth is just someone else's fear, someone else's limitation, someone else's version of safety passed down in the disguise of wisdom. And so we carry these beliefs like architecture built by strangers, structures designed to keep us small, obedient, manageable. We live inside mental blueprints we never drew, follow rules we never questioned, pursue goals that never felt like ours, and then wonder why success feels hollow and progress feels like a prison. But the moment you begin to awaken, truly awaken, you realize that clarity cannot grow in a mind built on someone else's scaffolding. It must be rebuilt, brick by brick, thought by thought. And this rebuilding isn't a gentle process. It's violent in its honesty. It's surgical in its precision. It cuts through every lie you've wrapped in logic, every excuse you've baptized as reality, every false ceiling you mistook for the sky. It doesn't ask for your permission, but it demands your participation. Because belief is not passive, it is architecture. And if you don't design it yourself, someone else will live in your head and charge rent in the currency of your potential. Think of Henry Ford, not the icon, but the man before the myth. A man who dared to believe that automobiles could belong to the people, not just the privileged. At a time when horses ruled the roads and every expert said cars were toys for the elite, he chose to believe differently. And belief, real belief, is always disruptive. It will make you the fool before it makes you the pioneer. It will make you alone before it makes you understood. But Ford didn't need consensus. He needed conviction. And conviction is belief with weight. It's belief that's been tested, beaten, burned, and still remains. That's the kind of belief that changes the world. Not because it's popular, but because it's undeniable. That kind of belief doesn't come from textbooks. It doesn't come from motivational slogans or surface-level inspiration. It comes from going into the depths of your own mind and asking the hardest questions. What do I actually believe about myself? About success? About struggle? About my limits? About what's possible? And more importantly, where did those beliefs come from? Because most people don't believe what's true. They believe what's familiar. They believe what they've been exposed to. What they've seen repeated enough to feel real, even if it was built on fear, insecurity, or someone else's failure. You watch your parents struggle with money and you believe wealth must be unethical. You see people fail at love and believe connection is dangerous. You watch others play small and call it humility. And every one of these beliefs becomes a brick in the invisible wall between you and your potential. But walls can be torn down. And that's what this chapter is. An invitation to demolition. Not destruction for its own sake, but a clearing. A cleansing. A sacred dismantling of everything false, everything borrowed, everything that no longer serves you. Because clarity demands a clean foundation. It cannot be built on inherited fear. It cannot grow in the shadows of secondhand doubt. Look at the lives that changed history. Every one of them started with a belief so bold it sounded absurd. The belief that slaves could be free. The belief that disease could be cured. The belief that flight was possible. The belief that art, invention, imagination, and soul could triumph over logic, politics, and convention. These beliefs weren't safe. They weren't accepted. They were ridiculed, resisted, and rejected until they became real. But for belief to matter, it has to become more than an idea. It has to move through your bloodstream. It has to inform the way you walk, speak, build, and show up. It has to shape your decisions, not just when things are easy, but especially when they aren't. Because belief without action is decoration. It's performance. It's surface-level noise. And we are not here for noise, we are here for truth. For clarity. For the kind of belief that doesn't just decorate your life, but defines it. And so you ask yourself, not what do I want to believe, but what must I believe to become who I am meant to become? What must I believe when fear is loud? When doubt knocks? When failure looks like proof? What belief will carry me through the storm, not because it protects me from pain, but because it gives that pain purpose? Because every belief you hold becomes the lens through which you see the world, and the lens is the reality. If you believe life is hostile, you'll find enemies in every face. If you believe opportunity is rare, you'll miss the gold beneath your feet. If you believe you are unworthy, you will sabotage every blessing before it can settle. But if you believe that you are here for a reason, if you believe that clarity, power, and greatness are not inherited but forged, then even your failure becomes part of the architecture. That is the ultimate clarity, not certainty, but conscious construction. The knowledge that you are not a victim of your thoughts, but the architect of your beliefs. And if the old beliefs must crumble, let them crumble. If they must burn, let them burn. There is no legacy in playing safe. There is no clarity in living borrowed truths. Build your beliefs deliberately. Shape them like sculpture. Choose them like armor. Let them carry the weight of your deepest values, not the weight of other people's doubts. And when they are tested, because they will be tested, let them be strong enough to hold you steady, not because they were easy to believe, but because they were earned. This is your inner cathedral. Every thought a beam. Every value a stone. Every truth a window that lets the light back in. And you do not decorate cathedrals with trends, you build them to last. You are not here to inherit belief. You are here to build it. And once you do, once you commit to that inner construction with discipline, patience, and ferocity, then the world outside can shake, the noise can rise, the storms can come, and you will not flinch. Because your clarity will not be shaken. Chapter 4. The Weight of Vision. The truth is, most people never lose their potential, they simply lose sight of it. Not all at once, but slowly, gradually, invisibly. Like a fog rolling in across a wide open field, not violent or sudden, but persistent and subtle, until one day you look around and realize you can no longer see the horizon that once pulled you forward. Vision doesn't vanish, it erodes, and not because it's weak, but because it was never fully claimed, never fully protected, never built into something so clear, so visceral, so untouchable that no amount of noise, failure, or resistance could take it from you. And yet we treat vision like it's a mood, a spark, a passing flash of inspiration, instead of what it truly is, a contract, a sacred responsibility. A declaration made not to the world, but to yourself, that there is something in this life so worth building, becoming, and sacrificing for, that you are willing to walk through every storm, break every rule, challenge every assumption, and destroy every lesser version of yourself that gets in the way. Vision is not what you see when things are clear. Vision is what you hold on to when everything around you is chaos, when the path is broken, when the map is gone and the compass spins and everyone around you tells you to be realistic, to shrink, to wait. Vision is what lets you keep building the bridge even when you can't yet see the other side. And those who lack it are not broken. They are simply drowning in noise, reacting to the urgent instead of responding to the important, pulled by the current of distraction instead of anchored by direction. But vision doesn't just arrive. It must be created, crafted in solitude, shaped through contemplation, and forged in fire. It begins not with an answer, but with a question. What do you see when the world isn't telling you what to want? What rises in your mind when the applause is gone and the room is quiet and the only voice left is your own? What image refuses to die inside you, no matter how many years you've buried it beneath excuses, obligations, and distractions? Because that image, that haunting, burning image of who you could become and what you could create if you stopped negotiating with fear, is not imagination. It's memory. It's the memory of your future trying to break through the walls you've built to protect your comfort. It's the blueprint your soul came into this world carrying. And you can ignore it. You can outrun it. You can drown it in noise and call it maturity. But it will not leave. Because it was never designed to entertain you. It was designed to guide you. The problem is, most people don't trust themselves enough to protect that vision. They trade it too easily for something more immediate: safety, validation, predictability, belonging. They learn to shrink their dreams to fit their current circumstances instead of stretching their circumstances to match their vision. They begin to believe that anything too big, too bold, too vivid must be unrealistic. And realism, as it's so often preached, is just fear in a lab coat, an intellectual way to rationalize surrender. But look back. Look at the ones who changed history. Do you think Martin Luther King Jr. was being realistic when he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and spoke of a world that did not yet exist? Do you think Amelia Earhart was being cautious when she flew into the unknown skies of a male-dominated world that told her women should stay grounded? Do you think Elon Musk, regardless of what you think of him, was being pragmatic when he bet his entire fortune on rockets blowing up and electric cars when neither were profitable? These weren't just ideas, they were visions. Visions so large, so loud inside the mind of their creator, that the noise of the outside world became irrelevant. That is what vision does. It becomes louder than the doubt. It becomes heavier than the fear. It becomes more real than the circumstances. And that's when something changes, not in the world first, but in you. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for perfect timing. You stop negotiating with mediocrity. You start acting not based on where you are, but based on where you are going. And when you begin to act from vision, rather than reaction, everything shifts. You begin to choose your influences. You no longer follow what's trending, you follow what's true. You no longer speak just to be heard, you speak to build. You no longer look for shortcuts, you build foundations. You begin to attract challenge, not because the universe is punishing you, but because it is shaping you. Because clarity without challenge is an illusion, and vision without pressure is fantasy. You must become the person who can hold that vision, under pressure, under criticism, under loneliness. And that person is not built in moments of inspiration. That person is built in the dark, in the mundane, in the repetition, in the silence, in the hours no one sees and the doubts no one hears. That person is built when you keep showing up even when your vision is nothing more than a flicker in a room full of fog. And the longer you walk with it, the more it becomes you, not something you carry, but something you are. And when you reach that point, you no longer need motivation. You no longer need approval. You are moved not by hype, but by hunger. Not by outcome, but by alignment. Not by external metrics, but by the internal resonance of knowing that every step you take is towards something that matters. But vision requires responsibility. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once it becomes clear, it becomes a responsibility. And that responsibility is not to be perfect, it is to be honest. Honest enough to admit when you're off track. Honest enough to hold the line when the world pulls you away from it. Honest enough to face your own laziness, procrastination, and addiction to convenience without flinching. Because if your vision doesn't scare you, stretch you, break you, and rebuild you, then it's not vision, it's entertainment. This is your edge. The place where clarity meets courage. The place where your mind becomes sharp enough to slice through the fog and your soul becomes strong enough to hold that clarity in a world addicted to distraction. This is not about positive thinking or fantasy scripting. This is about building a relationship with your future so vivid, so real, that it speaks louder than your past. Because the world doesn't need more people reacting to what already exists. It needs people bold enough to build what doesn't. It needs visionaries, not because they have perfect plans, but because they have unshakable intention. So write the vision. Speak it. Sculpt it. Obsess over it. Build habits around it. Burn your old identity for it. And when it gets heavy, when it gets hard, when it gets lonely, carry it anyway. Because clarity without vision is directionless. And vision without discipline is a dream. But clarity built on vision, guided by belief, and sustained by discipline, becomes destiny. And this is how you rise, not above others but above the noise. Not to escape the world, but to change your place within it. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to finally walk in alignment with what you already knew, before the world tried to make you forget. Chapter 5. The Fire Beneath the Function. You were not born just to function. You were not created simply to perform tasks, meet deadlines, collect paychecks, and fade quietly into the machinery of civilization. There is something deeper inside you, ancient, primal, and completely indifferent to your resume, your follower count, or your daily to-do list. A presence that does not care how many boxes you check off but demands to know one thing with brutal, soul-splitting intensity. Why are you here? Not the generic why. Not the polite, polished, socially acceptable answer you've practiced to sound insightful at networking events or during performance reviews. The real why. The unfiltered why. The one that keeps showing up in the cracks between your distractions. The one that speaks in moments when your defenses are down, when you're too tired to pretend, too broken to perform, or too honest to lie to yourself. That is your purpose, not a label, not a title, not a goal, but a gravitational pull towards something bigger than comfort, louder than fear, and deeper than success. Purpose is not something you find lying around on a quiet weekend when you finally have a bit of free time. It's not a Pinterest quote or a personality test result. Purpose is what remains when all the noise is gone, when the distractions have run dry, and the silence demands to know what you're willing to bleed for. It is not discovered, it is revealed. Revealed through clarity, through discipline, through pain, and through radical self-inquiry that most people never dare to do because the answers don't always come gift-wrapped in joy. They often come through loss, through failure, through standing face to face with your own mediocrity and finally deciding you're done living below your potential. And here's the brutal truth. Most people are not suffering from lack of opportunity or intelligence or even time. They're suffering from the sickness of misalignment. They wake up and go through motions that have no meaning. They say yes to obligations that drain them. They pursue goals that don't speak to their soul. And eventually, they either collapse from exhaustion or become so numb that they forget there was ever anything worth feeling to begin with. But when you live without purpose, you will always be at the mercy of your moods, your fears, your doubts, and the noise of the world. You will be a leaf in the wind, pulled by every trend, every crisis, every opinion, because you have nothing anchoring you to your own soul. And that kind of life might look functional. It might even look successful from the outside, but it's hollow. It's fragile. It cannot stand in the face of real adversity because it was never built on anything real. Purpose changes that. It does not eliminate fear, but it makes fear irrelevant. It does not remove pain, but it makes pain meaningful. It does not guarantee success, but it guarantees significance. Because the question stops being, will this be easy? And becomes, is this worth it? And when you're aligned with your purpose, the answer is always yes, even when it hurts, even when it costs you, even when no one understands, because what you're doing is no longer about applause, comfort, or reward. It's about integrity. It's about finally living in a way that makes sense to your spirit. But purpose does not scream. It whispers. And you cannot hear it when your life is loud with distraction, when your schedule is full of obligations you secretly resent, when your every thought is interrupted by someone else's agenda, someone else's urgency, someone else's noise. You must create space for it. You must protect that space like your life depends on it, because it does. And no, it will not come to you in a flash of perfect clarity. It will come in pieces. It will come in patterns. It will come in pain. It will come in the strange joy you feel doing things that no one pays you for. It will come in the goosebumps when you speak your truth out loud. It will come in the fire you feel when you stand up for something that matters to you, even if your voice shakes. Purpose reveals itself in your response to adversity, in the things you can't stop thinking about, in the problems that break your heart, and in the moments when time disappears because you're doing something that connects so deeply to who you are that you forget you're even trying. And yet, most people miss it, not because it isn't there, but because they've never slowed down enough to notice. Because they're too busy surviving, performing, or pretending to listen when they've already decided it's safer to stay numb. But safety is not the goal. Comfort is not the goal. The goal is alignment. The goal is to wake up and live in a way where your thoughts, your actions, your energy, your values, and your direction all point to the same place. That place is called purpose. And when you reach it, when you truly begin to live from it, it changes everything. Suddenly, your energy has focus. Your pain has context. Your work has meaning. Your time has weight. You stop negotiating with mediocrity. You stop arguing with critics. You stop chasing attention. Because you are no longer interested in being impressive, you are obsessed with being useful. You are no longer trying to build a life that looks good. You are building one that feels right. And that feeling is unmistakable. It is the absence of internal conflict. It is the peace that comes from knowing that, even if the road is hard, you are on the right one. And when that alignment becomes real, discipline becomes effortless. Not because the work gets easier, but because it gets worth it. You stop looking for motivation because you've found direction. You stop needing praise because you've found purpose. And purpose will outlast every emotion, every obstacle, every rejection, because it is not something the world gave you, so it's not something the world can take away. This is why clarity matters. This is why silence matters. This is why you must dig beneath the noise. Because buried beneath all of it, beneath the pressure, the distraction, the performance, is a version of you who remembers what you came here to do. Not in vague terms, but in real, gritty, actionable form. And that version of you doesn't need to be discovered, it needs to be remembered. And once remembered, it must be protected. At all costs. Because that is your real work. That is the fire beneath the function. And that is the only path to a life that feels whole. Chapter 6. The Sacred Architecture of Discipline. There is a story that never gets told loudly enough. A truth that lives quietly behind every great creation, every legacy that stood the test of time, every visionary who did more than just dream, they built. And that story is not about talent, not about genius, not even about opportunity. It is about the unromantic, unglamorous, non-negotiable force that holds the weight of purpose when motivation fails, when inspiration dies, and when the world gives you every excuse to stop. That force is called discipline. And without it, nothing you care about will survive. Not your vision, not your values, not your freedom, and certainly not your clarity. Discipline is the structure you build around your soul so that your spirit can be free to express itself without being lost to chaos. It is not restriction, it is precision. It is not suffering, it is sovereignty. And in a world obsessed with shortcuts, hacks, and hacks for the hacks, discipline remains the one thing that cannot be faked, cannot be borrowed, cannot be outsourced, and cannot be replaced by passion. Because passion, as beautiful as it is volatile. It comes and goes like weather. But discipline? Discipline is climate control. It creates the conditions for greatness to thrive, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what the market says, regardless of whether or not anyone is watching. And the greatest lie modern culture sells you is that discipline is a punishment, a limitation, a set of rules designed to squeeze the joy out of your life in the name of productivity. But that's only what it looks like when it's imposed from the outside. Real discipline, the kind that liberates you rather than imprisons you, can never come from someone else's plan. It must be born from within. It must be tied directly to something sacred, something personal, something so valuable that to let it rot would feel like a betrayal of your very existence. Because when discipline is tied to fear, it becomes control. But when discipline is tied to purpose, it becomes devotion. This is the shift the world doesn't teach you. Because it's easier to sell fast results than it is to preach long-term transformation. The world tells you to do just enough to avoid pain, to automate your habits, to discipline yourself like a machine, to check off the boxes, and hope it leads to fulfillment. But machines don't create legacies. Machines don't bleed for a cause. Machines don't carry purpose through the fire. That's something only humans can do, humans with clarity, with vision, with discipline that is rooted not in guilt or shame or perfectionism, but in reverence for what they're building. Because make no mistake, every choice you make is a brick in something. Every hour, every repetition, every moment of resistance overcome is constructing the architecture of your future. And the question is not whether you are building, because you are. The question is, are you building with intention, or are you building by default? Are you letting convenience shape your habits? Or are you shaping your habits to serve your mission? Discipline, when understood correctly, is not rigid. It is rhythmic. It is alive. It listens. It adapts. But it never negotiates with laziness. It never dances with distraction. It is not emotional, though it respects emotion. It does not ask, "Do I feel like it today?" because it is rooted in a truth deeper than mood. And that truth is this: the life you want cannot be given to you. It must be forged, in discomfort, in resistance, in long stretches of effort that go unnoticed by the world but cannot be ignored by your future self. Think of the ones who lasted. Think of Kobe Bryant shooting in empty gyms before dawn. Think of Beethoven writing symphonies he could no longer hear. Think of Churchill carrying the weight of a crumbling world while sleep-deprived and under fire. Discipline is what carried them, not because it was easy, but because the cost of not showing up was greater than the pain of effort. That's what most people miss. Discipline is not about perfection, it's about prioritization. It's about knowing what matters most and giving it your best even when you have nothing left, because the alternative is a kind of slow death you're no longer willing to tolerate. And this is where discipline transcends habit. Habits are mechanical. Discipline is spiritual. It is what makes you show up when no one else does. It is what makes you say no to what feels good now so that you can say yes to what feels right later. It is what separates those who flirt with greatness from those who marry it. But in today's culture, where everything is optimized for ease and instant reward, discipline feels unnatural at first, because everything around you is engineered to reward impulsivity. One click, one scroll, one dopamine hit, one more excuse to start tomorrow. And if you are not careful, your brain will begin to believe that discipline is oppression and that indulgence is freedom. But that's the great lie of the distracted world, that ease equals joy. It doesn't. It equals numbness. And numbness is not peace, it is decay. Real peace, the kind that lasts, the kind that feels earned, only comes when your actions are aligned with your values, when your days are built to serve your vision, and when your boundaries are strong enough to hold the weight of what you're becoming. And that peace requires discipline. Not just in your schedule, but in your thoughts, in your words, in the way you carry yourself in rooms where no one knows your name. It requires holding yourself to a higher standard even when no one's looking, because you are always looking, and the person you become when no one's watching is the one who shapes your destiny. So, no, discipline is not about suffering. It's about sacredness. It's about devotion to your own evolution. It's about refusing to hand your life over to chance, impulse, or convenience. And the longer you live in alignment with that truth, the less you crave external motivation, the less you tolerate mediocrity, the more your life becomes an act of integrity. Because when discipline is real, you don't have to prove anything, you embody it. You walk differently. You speak with authority, not because you're louder, but because your words are backed by a lifestyle that doesn't flinch when tested. And when others are lost in trends, you stay rooted in principle. When others seek comfort, you build capacity. When others panic, you execute. Not because you're emotionless, but because your clarity is stronger than your chaos. This is the power of true discipline. Not a prison, but a pathway. Not a punishment, but a promise. A promise to yourself that your potential will not be wasted, your vision will not be abandoned, your life will not be an accident. Because once discipline becomes part of who you are, you stop chasing results and start creating a reality, one brick at a time, one action at a time, one day at a time, until one day you look around and realize that the life you're living is no longer something you hoped for, it is something you built. Chapter 7. The Weight of Motion. Action without clarity is noise in disguise. Motion dressed up to look like momentum, busyness that feels productive but ultimately leads nowhere, a frantic pace that gives the illusion of progress while leaving you stuck in the same internal loops that have always held you back. In a world where movement is glorified and reflection is mistaken for weakness, the greatest deception is this: that doing more means becoming more. But the truth, if you're brave enough to face it, is far less glamorous. Because real action, the kind that transforms not just your circumstances but your identity, is not about speed or quantity. It is about alignment. It is about doing the right thing at the right time, for the right reason, with the full weight of your conviction behind it, even when it hurts, even when it scares you, even when no one sees you. Because action, when done with intention, becomes sacred. It becomes the moment where thought and flesh merge, where dreams leave the realm of fantasy and begin the long, difficult, beautiful descent into form. And that descent is not elegant. It is messy. It is painful. It requires more failure than success, more grit than talent, more repetition than revelation. But that's the point. Because clarity, purpose, belief, vision, and discipline are all preparation. They are the inner framework. Action is the test. It is where all those internal commitments are measured against reality. And most people never take that test. Not really. They plan. They theorize. They talk. They wait. They perfect. They perform. But they do not move, not in the way that matters, not in the way that rewires their nervous system, not in the way that actually costs them something. And yet everything you want exists on the other side of movement. Not just motion, but movement, with risk, with resistance, with sacrifice. Because nothing in this life will shift until you shift it. Nothing will move until you make it move. And the longer you wait for certainty before you act, the longer you stay enslaved to fear wearing the mask of logic. The world rewards execution, not contemplation. Not because thinking is bad, but because thinking alone changes nothing. It is only when thought is made visible through action that reality begins to bend around you. That is the paradox of action. The boldest steps are usually taken while still afraid, while still unsure, while still surrounded by reasons not to act. Edison did not invent the light bulb because he had a guarantee. He did it because he couldn't stop chasing a possibility. He failed repeatedly and still moved. Disney built his first studio with borrowed money and shattered timelines, not because he knew it would work, but because not building was more unbearable than risking everything. Action was their language. Not because they were fearless, but because they moved despite fear. That is the standard. You don't rise by waiting. You rise by deciding that hesitation is no longer worthy of your attention. You rise by refusing to be the person who always almost started. You rise by putting your hands in the dirt of your life and shaping it, not with perfection, but with power, imperfect, unfinished, and fully committed. Because there is a point you reach where not acting becomes more painful than failing. A point where the cost of silence becomes louder than the risk of speaking. A point where the life you're tolerating becomes so suffocating that the fear of change becomes a privilege, because at least it means you're finally awake enough to care. And when you hit that point, when your soul refuses to sit still, you must act. Even if the path isn't clear. Even if the map doesn't exist. Even if all you have is a whisper and a direction. You act. Not because you know exactly what comes next, but because clarity is not a prerequisite for movement, it is a consequence of it. You do not wait to feel ready. You become ready by stepping into the tension, into the unknown, into the moment where you can no longer hide behind strategy, identity, or excuses. You act. And the moment you do, the fog begins to thin. But here's what most people never tell you. Action will break you before it builds you. It will expose your limitations. It will test your resolve. It will call every bluff you've been living under. It will force you to confront the places where your self-image does not yet match your calling. And if you are honest, you will see it not as failure, but as feedback, as information, as the fire that tempers steel. Because action isn't just what you do, it's what you become by doing. This is why the work matters more than the outcome. Because you cannot control the result, but you can control the standard. You can decide that every action you take will be done with full integrity, full intention, full presence, not for applause, but because you refuse to live another day in contradiction. You can decide that your life will be an expression of your deepest truths, not your deepest fears. You can decide to stop being a consumer of other people's courage and become the author of your own. And when that shift happens, when action becomes your language instead of hesitation, you begin to build what others only talk about. You begin to embody the values most people write down and forget. You become a force, not because of what you accomplish, but because of how relentlessly you pursue alignment between who you are and what you do. That's when momentum kicks in. That's when the right people begin to show up, not because you waited for them, but because you became undeniable. That's when the opportunities arrive, not because you chased them, but because you became a magnet for them through consistency. That's when clarity becomes natural, Not because the fog disappears, but because you have learned to walk forward anyway. But if you wait, if you let fear drive, if you let overthinking hijack your courage, if you keep searching for the perfect plan, you will still be here a year from now, holding the same potential, asking the same questions, wondering why your life feels smaller than it should. And no one will rescue you. No one is coming to drag you into your purpose. That is your job. And that job begins with movement. Not massive. Not perfect. Not flashy. Just real. Just intentional. Just one action taken with your full presence, your full heart, your full commitment. Then another. Then another. Until one day you realize you're no longer watching the story unfold, you're writing it. Because movement isn't something you do. It's who you become. Chapter 8. The Quiet Strength of Gratitude. In a world designed to make you feel incomplete, where every scroll reminds you of what you don't have, who you're not, how far behind you are, and how much better someone else seems to be doing, the most subversive, most radical, most defiant act you can commit is not to hustle harder, not to fight for more, not to endlessly strive for some distant milestone. It is to stop, breathe, and recognize what is already here. Because in that pause, in that moment where you shift your focus from deficiency to sufficiency, you take back control of your perception, your peace, and ultimately your power. Gratitude is not weakness. It is not naivety. It is not about pretending things are better than they are. It is not about sugarcoating pain or romanticizing struggle. It is about choosing, with clarity and with strength, to refuse the constant pull toward scarcity. It is about seeing the full picture when the world only wants to show you the missing pieces. And if you think that's soft, then you haven't understood the battle you're in, because distraction is not your greatest enemy, dissatisfaction is. It's the constant itch that tells you you're never enough, never doing enough, never earning enough, never winning fast enough. And if you don't stop to question it, if you don't learn to anchor yourself in what is real, then you will spend your entire life climbing ladders that were never leaning on anything real to begin with. Gratitude, in its rawest and most honest form, is not an escape from ambition. It is the fuel that keeps your ambition from becoming cancerous. It is the line you draw between progress and obsession. It is the reminder that while you strive toward what could be, you are still fully awake to what is. Because if you can't find peace where you are, you won't find it where you're going. That's not just philosophy, it's physics of the soul. You cannot outrun the mindset you refuse to confront. You cannot heal a life by speeding it up. You heal it by witnessing it, fully, honestly, without filters, and that witnessing begins with gratitude. Not the performative kind. Not the curated kind. Not the kind you force out because a book told you to write down 3 things every morning. The kind that hits you in the gut when you realize that someone else is praying for the problems you complain about. The kind that stops you mid-step when you realize how many versions of your past self would be stunned by what you now take for granted. The kind that rewires your nervous system because, for one clear moment, you are no longer measuring your life by metrics, but by meaning. And when that gratitude is real, it changes how you walk through the world. You stop needing to prove things that no longer matter. You stop comparing timelines that were never meant to be the same. You stop resenting the process and start respecting it, because you see that every struggle carved something into you that no success ever could. You see that gratitude is not just a feeling, but a perspective. A lens that lets you extract depth from even the darkest moments. And that lens becomes a filter against the lie that you are behind, broken, or lacking. This is what most people don't understand. Gratitude is clarity. It is the perspective shift that realigns your mind with truth. Not the truth of social consensus or algorithmic popularity, but the truth of what is actually here, what is actually working, what is actually sacred about your life in this moment. And yes, it takes practice. Because the world trains you to scan for flaws. It conditions you to see the gap, not the gain. It rewards dissatisfaction by selling you its cure. But gratitude is not a feeling that arrives when life is good. It is a practice that reveals how good life already is. That practice, over time, becomes a kind of inner wealth. A wealth that cannot be stolen by market crashes, algorithm changes, failed relationships, or temporary losses. A wealth that allows you to move through hard seasons with grace, Not because you deny the pain, but because you are not blinded by it. You remember. You remember who you are, what you've survived, what you've built, and what you still carry that no external storm can touch. You remember that gratitude does not require perfection, it only requires presence. And once you build that inner wealth, the game changes. You stop chasing outcomes that don't belong to you. You stop begging the future to save you. You stop needing the world to validate your worth. Because you're no longer acting from emptiness, you're acting from fullness. And that fullness is magnetic. It gives you power, not because it changes your reality instantly, but because it changes how you see your reality, and what you see, you respond to. And what you respond to becomes your life. Gratitude, then, becomes more than reflection. It becomes strategy. It becomes how you recover faster, how you stay anchored in chaos, how you sharpen your focus without hardening your heart. It becomes how you hold your vision without resenting your current season. It becomes how you remind yourself, over and over again, that you are not behind, that you are not broken, that you are not late, you are in process. And the process is always holy. But let's be honest, there will be days when gratitude is the last thing you feel. Days when the noise is loud, when the weight is heavy, when everything in you wants to collapse inward and say, "Why me?" And it's in those moments, not the easy ones, not the triumphant ones, but the ugly ones, where real gratitude becomes real power. Because it's no longer emotional, it's intentional. It's a decision to say, even here, something is growing. Even now, something is being shaped. Even in this, I am not done. And when you can say that, when you can look life in the face and thank it for its storms, its silence, its delays, its detours, then nothing can own you. Not failure, not fear, not time, not the lie that says you're too late, too flawed, too far gone. Because you've already decided that your worth does not depend on what's missing, but on what remains. And what remains is always enough to begin again. Chapter 9. The Shape of Survival. Change has no interest in your comfort. It doesn't ask permission before it arrives. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how much you've planned, how long you've prepared, or how much you wish things could stay the same. It simply moves, like fire, like flood, like wind through structures built to last but not built to bend. And if you're not willing to evolve, if you're not able to adjust, to shift, to release who you were in order to make space for who you must become, then you will break, not because you're weak, but because you held on to something that was already gone. Adaptability is not weakness. It's not indecision. It's not lack of principle or conviction. It is the highest form of strength, because it requires that you stay rooted in who you are while being flexible in how that truth is expressed in the world. It is the art of movement without compromise, evolution without identity collapse. It is not becoming someone else. It is becoming more of who you truly are through layers of response, refinement, and redefinition. And this is why most people resist it, because it forces them to let go of fixed ideas, outdated versions of themselves, comfortable narratives that may no longer fit but feel familiar enough to cling to. We fall in love with who we used to be, and in doing so, we suffocate who we were born to become. You are not meant to stay the same. Growth is not a linear path upward. It is a spiral. It is a series of deaths and rebirths, a shedding of skin so profound that the you who began the journey would not recognize the you who finishes it. And if that scares you, good. It means you understand the cost. It means you're beginning to grasp the weight of transformation, not as an Instagram slogan but as a way of life. Because to adapt in this world, truly adapt, means to let go not just of what isn't working, but of what used to work and no longer does. This is where the struggle lives, not in the unknown future, but in the unwillingness to release what once felt like safety. We become addicted to our old strategies, our past successes, the identities we built to survive seasons that have long since ended. And yet we wonder why we feel stuck. We wonder why our clarity fades. We wonder why our strength no longer holds. But it's not because we're broken. It's because we're trying to live this chapter with last chapter's tools, and the story has already changed. History remembers those who adapted not because they were lucky, but because they were willing to evolve faster than their circumstances could destroy them. Darwin didn't say the strongest survive. He said the most adaptable do. The ones who refused to see change as threat, and instead saw it as information. The ones who didn't personalize disruption, but saw it as an invitation. The ones who looked at the collapsing structure of the known and said, "Good. Let's build something stronger." Look at those who've thrived across time. Those who turned crises into catalysts, adversity into advantage. They didn't pray for stability. They trained for agility. They learned to pivot with power. They learned to let go of what no longer aligned, even if it was working, even if it was profitable, even if it earned them applause, because they understood something deeper, that surviving success can be harder than surviving failure if you're not careful. Success makes you still, comfortable, rigid, but adaptability keeps you humble, teachable. And adaptability isn't just a mindset, it's a muscle. One you develop not through theory, but through exposure, through risk, through motion, through being willing to stand in a situation that demands more of you than you currently know how to give, and instead of collapsing, you expand. You don't wait to feel ready. You decide to become ready. And in doing so, you stretch your identity to match your future instead of shrinking your future to match your identity. But this kind of adaptation comes at a cost. The cost of certainty. The cost of the familiar. The cost of being right. And many are not willing to pay it. They would rather stay rooted in the known, even if it's killing them slowly, than venture into the uncertainty of what might be better. But clarity, real clarity, doesn't come from clinging. It comes from movement. It comes from stepping outside of your default programming and choosing your response on purpose. And this is the secret. Adaptability doesn't mean reacting faster, it means responding better. It means pausing long enough to ask not, "How do I fix this?" but, "What does this require me to become?" Because every disruption is a mirror. Every unexpected change is a test. And every test is an opportunity to decide, will I evolve or will I repeat? Will I move forward or will I relive the same lesson again and again under different disguises? This is why clarity and adaptability are inseparable. Because without clarity, you adapt out of fear. You shapeshift for survival, not for growth. But with clarity, you adapt with intention. You shape your new direction consciously. You let go not to escape, but to ascend. And when you move from that place, you don't lose yourself, you refine yourself. You don't become inconsistent, you become intelligent. The world is not stable. It never was. The idea of certainty was always an illusion. The market changes. Technology rewrites the rules. People leave. Seasons shift. And if your peace depends on things staying the same, you will never have peace. But if your power comes from within, if your clarity is strong enough to hold through the unknown, then change doesn't weaken you. It reveals you. You become adaptable not because you are passive, but because you are principled. Not because you have no direction, but because your direction is deeper than form. It is rooted in essence. And essence survives evolution. So let yourself change. Let your goals change. Let your identity stretch. Let your habits evolve. Let your beliefs mature. Let your vision expand. Not because you were wrong before, but because you are more now. Because that's what the journey demands. And that's what your future deserves. Chapter 10. The Anatomy of Resilience. Resilience is not what most people think it is. It is not the superficial bounce-back story you tell after the storm has passed. It is not the victory lap or the motivational speech or the triumphant ending tied neatly with a ribbon of redemption. No, real resilience is what happens in the middle. It is the private war. The moment you're still on the floor and everything in you wants to stay there. The space between the breaking and the rebuilding, when clarity is dim and the applause is gone and the only voice left is the one inside you that refuses to die. It is not loud. It is not cinematic. It is not convenient. It is simply the decision to continue, even when continuing doesn't feel heroic, just necessary. Because life doesn't break you all at once. It breaks you slowly, quietly, with small moments that pile up behind your eyes, little disappointments that harden into disillusionment, soft betrayals that begin to make you question whether effort is still worth it. And it's there, In the silence, in the confusion, in the fatigue that wraps around your chest like a weight no one else can see, that resilience becomes real. Not because you feel strong, but because you choose not to surrender to weakness. Not because you have answers, but because you continue walking without them. Resilience is not about how fast you recover. It's about what you become in the process of recovering. It's about refusing to let pain have the final word. It's about making a decision in the dark that you will not allow this to be the thing that defines you, that breaks you, that rewrites your story into something small, bitter, or defeated. Because the truth is, everyone gets knocked down, everyone. The difference is that some people use it as a reason to shrink, while others use it as the exact moment they decide never to settle again. Look deeper into any person you admire, and behind their strength you will find scars, not just physical or external, but mental, emotional, spiritual. Scars from fighting battles no one applauded them for. From showing up when no one noticed. From holding themselves together in seasons when everything was falling apart. From carrying responsibilities heavier than what looked possible from the outside. And those scars? They are not signs of weakness. They are evidence that something inside them could not be broken, even when everything else was. Think of Abraham Lincoln, who navigated not just a civil war but a depression that lingered like a shadow over his soul. Think of Viktor Frankl, who found meaning in the horror of concentration camps, who wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. Think of Nelson Mandela, who walked out of a prison after 27 years not with vengeance in his heart, but with the strength to forgive in order to build. That is resilience, not the denial of pain, but the mastery of it. Not avoidance, but transformation. Not erasing your past, but refusing to be erased by it. And resilience doesn't grow in comfort. It grows in pressure, in repetition, in the long hours of invisible labor, when your goals still feel far and your strength feels temporary. It grows when you continue to plant seeds in soil that hasn't shown signs of life yet. When you train your heart to keep hoping while your logic tells you to stop. When you sit inside failure long enough to hear what it's trying to teach you. Because failure, real failure, is only permanent when you give it permission to be. Otherwise, it is feedback. It is contrast. It is the force that shapes you into something your past self wasn't ready to carry. Resilience is also honesty, the ability to look at your wounds without flinching, to hold your brokenness without shame, and still choose to believe that something stronger can be built from it. It is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about knowing that things cannot be fine, and you can still take the next step. And sometimes that step isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed. Sometimes it's just not quitting. Sometimes it's just sending the email, having the conversation, facing the task, sitting with the emotion instead of escaping it. And those small steps? That's the real work. That's what turns survival into strength. That's what builds resilience from the inside out. But the world won't applaud those steps. It won't see them. It will only notice the results later, when you've already risen, already transformed, already moved past the things that tried to bury you. And by then it will call you strong. It will call you brave. But you'll know the truth. You weren't brave because you wanted to be, you were brave because you had to be. Because the alternative was stagnation. Because the pain of staying small finally became greater than the fear of rising. And when you understand that, when you internalize that resilience is not some special gift but a choice you make, day after day, against the grain of comfort and despair, you become unstoppable. Not because you're immune to pain, but because you are anchored in purpose. Because you are committed to your future. Because you refuse to hand your story over to the parts of you that haven't healed yet. That's resilience, the quiet refusal to stay broken. It's clarity in motion. It's strength with memory. It's a forward movement born not from ease but from endurance. And once you know that, once you've lived that, you no longer fear adversity. You welcome it, not as a friend, but as a forge. You know that anything sent to break you can also build you, if you refuse to stop. So let the noise come. Let the pressure rise. Let the path twist and the winds shift. You are not here to be untouched, you are here to become unshakable. Chapter 11. The Discipline of Becoming. There is a dangerous illusion in modern culture. The idea that learning is something you finish. That it ends with a degree, a certificate, a job title, or the completion of a course designed to measure comprehension but never understanding. That once you've reached a certain point of competence, your responsibility is to maintain appearances, not to deepen your awareness. But the truth, the raw, unavoidable, and often uncomfortable truth, is that the moment you stop learning, you stop evolving. The moment you believe you already know, already understand, already see clearly enough, is the exact moment your vision begins to blur and your relevance begins to decay, not because of some dramatic collapse, but because the world keeps moving and you chose to stand still. Learning, real learning, is not an accumulation. It is a surrender, a posture, a way of showing up to life not as someone who has arrived, but as someone who is always becoming. It is a daily discipline of humility, of curiosity, of choosing again and again to ask, what don't I see? What don't I understand? What needs to be unlearned so something deeper can be built in its place? Because the most dangerous knowledge is the kind that calcifies, knowledge that becomes rigid, defensive, self-righteous, knowledge that turns into identity rather than insight. And when that happens, when your past understanding becomes a prison instead of a platform, learning becomes impossible, and your clarity begins to die. You see it all around you. People with brilliant minds and broken thinking. People with education and no wisdom. Experts who stopped questioning. Leaders who stopped listening. Adults who stopped evolving. They once learned enough to function, and then decided that was enough to lead. But information is not wisdom. Data is not clarity. Having the right answer is not the same as living the right question. And those who truly understand this, those who stay open, malleable, awake, are the ones who continue to grow while others fossilize in the illusion of certainty. Because learning isn't just about progress, it's about self-respect. It's about refusing to allow yesterday's mindset to define tomorrow's possibilities. It's about honoring the fact that the world is bigger than your experience of it, that truth is deeper than your current vocabulary, and that evolution is only possible if you stop mistaking comfort for understanding. Learning demands that you admit what you don't know, what you don't yet see, what you might have misunderstood. And that kind of vulnerability is not weakness, it's power. Because it means you are more committed to truth than ego. But in a world addicted to performance, humility is rare. We are taught to have answers, not questions. We are trained to appear confident, even if we are confused. We are rewarded for certainty, even when it's fake. And in that performance, we lose the raw, vital connection to the deeper layers of truth that can only be accessed through quiet, consistent learning, the kind that doesn't show up in status updates or credentials, but in how we see, how we think, how we treat people, how we shift in the face of new information. And this is where the difference between clarity and intelligence becomes stark, because intelligence can win arguments, but clarity chooses to listen. Intelligence can memorize frameworks, but clarity knows when to throw them away. Intelligence seeks validation, clarity seeks truth. And that truth often comes dressed as contradiction, as discomfort, as failure, as the realization that what got you here won't get you there. So the learner, the real learner, must be willing to break their own frameworks, to discard their old tools, to evolve faster than their ego can explain. This isn't easy. It means being wrong, publicly, privately, painfully. It means watching your beliefs crumble, not because they were evil, but because they were incomplete. It means sitting at the feet of people younger than you, quieter than you, less accomplished on paper but wiser in areas where you are blind. It means not needing to be the smartest person in the room, but needing to be the most open. And when that shift happens, when you stop guarding your intellect and start feeding your growth, everything accelerates. Because learning multiplies clarity. It sharpens your perception. It trains your intuition. It allows you to see beneath the surface of problems, beneath the ego of conversations, beneath the patterns of the obvious. You stop reacting to life like a student memorizing rules, and start responding like a master who has lived the deeper layers of truth, who has wrestled with ideas and come out refined, not rigid. You become someone whose presence speaks louder than their resume. Someone whose wisdom isn't loud, but unshakable. Someone who knows that clarity isn't something you get once. It's something you earn over and over again through learning that never ends. Look at those who truly shaped the world, not just with innovation but with insight. Da Vinci was not a genius because he specialized. He was a genius because he learned relentlessly, across disciplines, across limitations. He was as obsessed with anatomy as he was with art, as fascinated by engineering as he was with movement. His mind was not chained by what he was supposed to know. It was fueled by what he wanted to understand. That's the learner's spirit. That's the mindset of someone who values depth over identity. And that mindset is as rare today as it is necessary. Because in a world full of people chasing trends, the one who learns with depth becomes timeless. In a world full of reaction, the one who learns with clarity becomes rooted. In a world full of noise, the one who learns in silence becomes dangerous, not because they are loud, but because they cannot be manipulated. They see. They discern. They choose with wisdom that was earned, not inherited. And you, if you choose this path, will not be the fastest. You will not always be the loudest. But you will last. You will rise with perspective when others collapse with confusion. You will adapt with intelligence when others harden into outdated certainty. You will find your next chapter not by pushing harder, but by seeing deeper. And that depth, fed by learning, protected by humility, and anchored in clarity, will make you unshakable. Because learning is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were always meant to become. Chapter 12. The Return to Stillness. Eventually, you arrive at the place you were always meant to find, not through escape, not through conquest, not through the validation of others or the perfection of a plan, but through the relentless, often painful, always necessary act of stripping away everything that is not you. You arrive not as a conqueror, not as a savior, not as a finished product, but as a human being who has walked through fire, who has faced silence, who has questioned everything the world told them to become, and who now stands, not above the noise, not beyond the chaos, but beneath it, in the still and sacred ground where the noise can no longer reach. This return to stillness is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is the home you've been searching for in every external achievement, every sprint toward progress, every failed attempt to outrun the questions you were too afraid to answer. Because the truth is, you were never supposed to find yourself in the noise. You were never supposed to discover who you are by performing for a world that doesn't know how to listen. You were meant to find yourself in the quiet, where no one is watching, where nothing is trending, where the only voice left is the one that never stopped whispering your name. Stillness is not silence. It is presence. It is the space between reaction and response, between chaos and creation. It is the place where clarity becomes not just a concept, but a condition, a natural state of being, earned through fire, anchored in truth, unshaken by noise. And the reason it is so rare is because it cannot be found quickly. It cannot be downloaded. It cannot be bought or borrowed or replicated from someone else's formula. Stillness can only be arrived at by those who are willing to sit with the full weight of themselves, not the curated version, not the productive version, but the raw, unedited, unmasked self that exists underneath the striving. And if you've made it here, truly here, it means you've stopped negotiating with distraction. It means you've stopped performing clarity and started living it. It means you understand now that clarity is not a moment. It is a maintenance, a way of seeing, a way of walking, a way of moving through the world that resists the pull to rush, to compete, to compare, to abandon your own voice just to be included in someone else's echo chamber. You've learned that not every battle is yours. Not every invitation deserves a yes. Not every demand is worth your peace. And so you begin to edit, not just your schedule, but your story. Not just your habits, but your beliefs. You begin to choose slow over fast, deep over wide, truth over trend. Because you've seen where the other road leads. You've seen what happens when you outsource your sense of self to algorithms and applause. You've seen what it feels like to chase endlessly and arrive nowhere. You've felt the fatigue of living disconnected from your own clarity, even when everything looked like it was working. And now you know, clarity is not about removing the noise from the world. It's about building the kind of mind that no longer crumbles in its presence. That kind of mind is not born. It is built. It is sculpted through mindset, belief, vision, purpose, discipline, action, gratitude, adaptability, resilience, learning, not as individual episodes, but as a continuous process of becoming. A cycle, a system, a rhythm that pulls you again and again beneath the noise, into the core of who you are, and reminds you, you were never lost, you were only distracted. You were never broken, you were only disconnected. You were never behind, you were only following someone else's path. And now that you remember, now that you see, you no longer need to force, or chase, or prove. You can build. Quietly. Deliberately. With your own hands. From the inside out. You no longer live by default, you live by design. Every thought, every hour, every decision becomes a brick in the foundation of something sacred. Something sustainable. Something aligned. Not perfect, but yours. And the world will keep spinning. The noise will keep rising. The distractions will evolve. The crises will recycle. The platforms will demand more of your time, your energy, your mind. But you will no longer belong to them. You will have returned to something deeper than culture, deeper than opinion, deeper than any temporary circumstance, yourself. You will have remembered the clarity that was always there, waiting beneath the surface, beneath the branding, beneath the tension. And from that place, life looks different. Not because it becomes easier, but because it becomes yours. And that difference changes everything. You choose your battles differently. You love more cleanly. You create with intention. You listen longer. You move slower. You say yes only when your soul says yes too. You say no without guilt. You wake up not with dread, but with direction. Not because everything is perfect, but because now, finally, you are no longer scattered. You are whole. And you are ready, not to return to the noise, but to rise above it, and carry the stillness with you, wherever you go.